Since I can remember, forests have always held a magnetic allure for me. There's something about the stillness of the trees, the whispers of the wind through the leaves, that invites me to listen closely, as if the place itself wants to tell me something. It's an ancient, profound whisper, like a confession buried in time. Today, I want to take you to a place that doesn't appear on maps, a forest where history has left invisible scars, but only reveal themselves to those willing to listen. They say that, in its shadows, the souls of those who lived and died here still have something to say. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I do know that there are secrets that only nature can keep, and sometimes it whispers. As we delve into this story, I invite you to keep your senses alert. Who knows? Maybe you too can hear those hidden confessions, those stories of love, betrayal, and sacrifice that lie hidden in the shadows. But before you venture further, ask yourself, are you ready to hear what the forest has to say? Story number 1, The History and Myth of the Forest. Since I began delving into the history of forests, I realized they are not just mere collections of trees. Each one is a remnant of something older, something that goes beyond our lifetimes, a space where the rules of nature and time seem to blur. This forest, in particular, has a history that fades into the echoes of centuries. It is not just a collection of trees and shadows, it is a place laden with myths, legends, and secrets. Let me tell you a story that captivated me the moment I heard it. Centuries ago, long before maps delineated borders or kings enacted laws, there was a belief shared by many cultures: forests were gateways to another world. In some places, like Eastern Europe or ancient Celtic lands, it was said that trees were guardians of souls. Forests were not just shelters for animals or those fleeing civilization but also sanctuaries for the spirits of the dead, places where wandering souls found rest. This forest, which we now walk through together, was considered a sacred sanctuary by ancient peoples. Legends tell that its trees were not mere living beings but witnesses to everything happening around them. Each leaf, each branch, held the memories of those who lived and died beneath their shade. There was a time when people came here not just for hunting or shelter but to communicate with their ancestors. Shamans from ancient tribes performed rituals in the forest clearings, connecting with the souls of their forebears, seeking answers or asking for protection. What's fascinating about these beliefs is that they were not confined to a single culture. Around the world, we find similar accounts. In ancient Greece, for example, it was believed that forests were home to dryads, female spirits linked to trees. In Japan, forests also had deep spiritual significance, as seen in the myths of the Kodama, spirits inhabiting trees. Waking the ire of one of these spirits could bring bad luck or even death. It was a way of reminding people that trees were not mere elements of the landscape, they were living beings, guardians of secrets. In our forest, the belief was that the trees could speak. Of course, not in words like ours, but in a subtle language that only a few could understand. It was said that if you stopped and listened attentively, you could hear their whispers. The people living nearby deeply respected this place. They did not cut down its trees or hunt indiscriminately because they knew the forest was always watching, always observing. Those who disobeyed the rules would soon face the consequences. One of the most well-known stories of this forest is that of the Tree of Souls. It was said that in the heart of the forest, there was an ancient tree, an imposing oak whose roots extended so deeply into the earth that it was believed to connect with the underworld. The people of the region believed that this tree was a doorway between our world and the world of the dead. During the darkest nights, under the light of the full moon, spirits would gather around this tree to confess. It was not a confessional like that of a church, but in its essence, it served a similar purpose. The spirits sought to release the weight of their souls, leaving their secrets in the wind for the trees to absorb. There was a time when this place was considered so sacred that even kings dared not claim it as part of their domains. During the Middle Ages, as European kingdoms expanded their borders and the power of the church grew, the forest became a refuge for the marginalized. Witches, heretics, and anyone fleeing persecution found asylum under its shadows. But as the years passed, these practices began to disappear. Modernity, with its rules and structures, started to conquer nature. Ancient rituals were forgotten, and the forest, though still standing, fell into silence. However, some believe that the forest has never forgotten. The trees still hold the confessions of those who lived and died here. And even though we have stopped listening, they continue to whisper. There are those who claim that if you venture deep enough into the forest, if you stay silent and let the wind envelop you, you can hear those confessions. Not clearly, not as a human voice, but as a sensation, a distant echo that sends shivers down your spine. A few years ago, I met a man who swore he had heard those voices. A forest ranger, someone who had spent decades caring for this place. He told me that on the quietest nights, when the wind blew softly, he could hear something that was not simply the sound of leaves rustling. It was something deeper, something older. It's as if the forest wants to speak to me, he once told me. It's not words, but I know there is something there. Something that wants to be heard. I pondered that for a long time. What confessions does the forest hold? Are they the voices of ancient spirits, or is it our own mind playing tricks on us? Sometimes I think that perhaps myths and legends are not just tales to scare children. Maybe they are ways our ancestors tried to give us a warning. They were telling us, beware of what you ignore, for what you cannot see might be more alive than you think. As I delved further into researching this place, I discovered that many myths about forests are related to sacrifice. Not just human sacrifice, although some ancient cultures certainly believed that forest spirits needed to be appeased with offerings, but also the sacrifice of what we are, of what we want to be. Forests are places where our deepest fears are confronted, where we come face to face with our own shadows. In Celtic cultures, for instance, the forest was seen as a place of transformation. Entering the forest was not just a physical journey but a spiritual one. By venturing into it, a person faced the unknown, their own demons, and emerged transformed on the other side. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you ventured alone into a place like this, with nothing but your thoughts for company? What would you find in the shadows, apart from the trees? Perhaps the forest not only guards the secrets of the dead but also our own. This place we are in now is more than a collection of trees. It is a silent witness to the passage of time, to life and death, to unheeded confessions. Perhaps we, who live so far from nature, have forgotten how to listen. But the forest remains here, patiently waiting for someone to do so. Story number 2, The Protagonist, a Forest Guardian. A few years ago, on one of my walks through this forest, I met someone who would completely change how I saw this place. He was no ordinary man. They called him the Guardian, but his real name was Igor. If you've ever met someone who seems more a part of the forest than the outside world, that was Igor. He lived alone in a small cabin hidden among the trees, with just enough to get by. His life was simple, austere, but there was something about him, a calm, a connection to this environment, that fascinated me. Igor had been in this forest for nearly 40 years. He inherited it from his grandfather, a similarly solitary man known as the unofficial protector of the place. According to him, his grandfather used to say that trees had souls, that this forest was not just a group of living beings but a living testimony to everything that had happened in its shadows. Igor, in his early decades, thought it was just the ramblings of a lonely old man, but over time, he began to question his own disbelief. I remember the first time he spoke to me about what he called the voices of the forest. He looked at me with those tired eyes that had seen more than any of us could imagine and said, "The forest is never silent. It is always speaking, always whispering. Most people can't hear it because they don't know how to listen. But if you live here long enough, if you immerse yourself in its rhythm, eventually the voices will find you." I must admit, at that moment, I thought perhaps the isolation had taken its toll on him. But the more I spoke with Igor, the more I realized that it wasn't madness but a profound sensitivity to his surroundings. Something in the forest had reached him, something beyond what normal senses could grasp. One night, while sharing a cup of tea in his cabin, Igor decided to open up even more. He told me a story that, according to him, was the key to understanding the confessions the forest had whispered to him over the years. Some time ago, on one of my night patrols, I ventured into a part of the forest I had never explored before. I don't know why, but something was pushing me. I walked for hours, guided only by the moonlight, until I reached a clearing. There, in the center, was a tree I had never seen before. It was older than any of the others, its roots seemed to scratch the earth as if searching for something deeper. I remained silent, listening, caught in his tale. I felt I had to stay. There was something about that place, an energy. I couldn't quite describe it. I sat at the foot of the tree, closed my eyes, and for the first time, I listened. It wasn't just the sound of the wind or the rustling of leaves. It was something more. Voices, whispers, as if the forest were trying to tell me a story, but I couldn't fully understand it. I asked him what the voices said. Igor sighed deeply, and after a moment of reflection, continued, "I don't know for sure. But I know they were not of this time. They were ancient, as if trapped in the space between what was and what is. Sometimes they were clear, other times just fragments. They spoke of sacrifices, lost loves, betrayals. They were like confessions from souls that never found rest. And the strangest thing was that I felt those voices were not only directed at me. It was as if the forest itself wanted me to carry those stories with me, as if it needed someone to remember them." I looked at him with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. Could it be that this man had been alone so long that his mind began to play tricks on him? But Igor did not seem disturbed or frightened. Rather, he was at peace with what he had experienced. It was as if he had accepted that the forest had its own language, its own way of communicating, and he was the bridge between that world and ours. As the years went by, Igor became more than just a guardian. He became the forest's confidant. He dedicated himself to patrolling its paths, observing, caring, listening. But something changed one night, something that made him rethink his role in this place. It was one of the few times I saw fear in his eyes. He told me about it during one of my visits, while we watched the sunset from his cabin. "A few months ago," he began, "I was on a night patrol when suddenly, I felt a presence. It wasn't like the other times. This time it wasn't friendly whispers or silent confessions. It was a call. Something demanding my attention. I felt compelled to follow it, to venture deeper into the forest, until I reached that same clearing, the same tree. But this time, something was different. The air was heavier, and the voices were louder." Igor paused, and his gaze wandered to the horizon. When I approached the tree, I saw something I had never seen before, an inscription, ancient, carved into its bark. It wasn't just a simple engraving. They were ancient symbols, like those I've seen in books about ancestral cultures, but more primitive. I felt a coldness sweep over me, as if those symbols held a power that should not be disturbed. That's when I knew I was not alone. The confessions I had been hearing for years were not just stories. They were warnings. I couldn't help but ask, warnings of what? Igor looked me directly in the eyes, his expression serious, almost solemn. That the forest is not just a place. It is a guardian of something much larger. Something that has been here long before we arrived. And those voices, those spirits, they are not at peace. Something happened here centuries ago, something dark, something trapped in time, and the souls left behind are trying to warn us. There are secrets in this forest that should not be unearthed. And I have become its protector. Or perhaps, its prisoner. The gravity in Igor's voice sent shivers down my spine. Until that moment, I had seen the forest as a place full of history and legends, but now I began to see it as something alive, something that could hold not only secrets but also dangers. From that night on, Igor changed. He remained the forest's guardian, but he was no longer the same. His connection to the place had deepened, and with it, his responsibility. He told me he felt his purpose was no longer just to care for the trees or protect the wildlife. Now he had to ensure that the forest's secrets remained forgotten, that the confessions he had heard stayed hidden, for not all secrets are meant to be revealed. Over time, I noticed that Igor became more isolated. He stopped receiving visitors, didn't talk to the locals, and only left his cabin when absolutely necessary. But he continued to patrol the forest, delving deeper and further away from known paths. One day, without warning, he stopped appearing. Rumors began to circulate. Some said he had lost his mind and that the forest had swallowed him up. Others claimed he had left in search of answers the forest hadn't given him. But I knew the truth, or at least what I wanted to believe. Igor had become a part of the forest. Maybe not physically, but his spirit, his presence, was now intertwined with the place. He had accepted his role as the guardian not only of the trees but of the secrets they held. And now, when I walk through the forest, I sometimes feel his presence. I don't see him, but in the moments of deepest silence, when the wind barely blows and the leaves whisper, I believe I hear his voice intertwined with the forest's. Perhaps Igor has become one of those confessions, one more story the forest keeps closely guarded. So, if you ever venture into this place and feel the wind speaking to you, the trees watching you, remember Igor's words. Not everything the forest confesses should be understood. Some secrets are meant to remain in the shadows, guarded by those who, like Igor, have made the forest their home, their life, and their legacy. After my last conversation with Igor, I couldn't shake off the idea of the warnings. I returned to the forest, filled with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Could it be true? Could these whispers contain more than just ancient memories? I decided to venture deeper into the parts of the forest Igor had mentioned, where the voices had seemed more intense, more urgent. I knew it was risky, but something inside me wouldn't let go of the feeling that I needed to understand what was happening here. It was a moonless night, the kind of darkness that seems to envelop everything. As I walked, I felt the weight of the forest pressing down on me. The trees, usually still, seemed to move slightly around me, as if something invisible was breathing among them. And then I heard it, a soft murmur, almost imperceptible at first, but gradually growing clearer. It wasn't just the natural sounds of the forest, it was something deeper, something resonating within me. I stopped, closed my eyes, and, as Igor had taught me, tried to listen beyond the wind, beyond the leaves. And there they were. The voices. At first, they were fragments, scattered words that made no sense. But soon they began to form phrases, as if they were trying to tell me a story. They spoke of betrayals, of fatal decisions made in the darkness of the night. I heard names, dates, moments that seemed trapped in an endless cycle. But there was more. I felt a deep desperation in these voices, an urgency that was unsettling. As if they were trying to warn me of something imminent. What had happened here? I began to wonder if the forest not only held secrets but that those secrets were alive, pulsing with a dark energy, waiting to be released. And then I felt it, the cold. A cold that didn't come from the weather, but from the very ground, from the deep roots of the trees. It was as if the forest itself was reacting to my presence, trying to communicate something beyond words. I felt fear, an ancestral fear, as if I were invading a space that didn't belong to me. The voices grew louder, clearer, almost as if they were shouting, "Don't come back. You're not ready for what's to come." Suddenly, I understood what Igor had meant by the warnings. This place, with all its beauty and mystery, was also a space charged with dark energy, with memories that should not be unearthed. There was something in this forest, something that had happened centuries ago, that was still seeking to be freed. And now, I found myself in the midst of it. I didn't know whether to continue or to turn back, but the urge to know was too strong. Still, the voices intensified, and I felt the forest itself pushing me away. It didn't want me to go further. What was hidden here? Why were these souls so desperate to tell me their story, and at the same time, so determined that I should not go any deeper? Finally, after what seemed like hours of internal conflict, I decided to turn back. I felt that, although I had discovered part of the truth, I was not yet ready to face the rest. Igor's warnings echoed in my mind, and I realized that some secrets are not meant to be revealed immediately. The forest's voices were powerful, but also dangerous. It was not the time to unearth everything. With my heart pounding and my mind still full of questions, I retreated from the clearing, leaving behind the voices but carrying with me the echo of their desperation. I knew the conflict wasn't over. The forest would continue to speak, to warn those who ventured too close. But who would listen to the voices next? Now, as I tell you this story, I can't help but reflect on the decisions I made that night. The forest spoke to me, and though I didn't understand everything it was trying to tell me, I learned something important. Not always are we ready to hear the truths around us. The forest's confessions, those voices trapped in the shadows, are just fragments of a much larger story. I know that not every day do we have the chance to confront mysteries as profound as this. But I believe that, in our daily lives, we often encounter our own forests, places in our minds or experiences that hold secrets, truths we're not yet prepared to face. And that's okay. Sometimes, simply knowing that these secrets exist is a step forward. Have you ever felt like there was something beyond what you can see, something whispering around you? Maybe, like me, you're also searching for answers in the midst of shadows. But remember, not all answers need to come right away. The forest taught me to have patience, to respect the timing, and to understand that not everything hidden should be revealed immediately. Today, looking back, I realized that the forest's voices were not just warnings, they were also an invitation. An invitation to listen, to open our eyes and hearts to the mysteries around us. Whether we walk through a real forest or the paths of our minds, there is always something to learn, something to discover. If this story has intrigued you, if it has resonated with you in some way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think the shadows of your own forest hide? Leave a comment. Sharing our experiences helps us find connections in this vast world full of secrets and whispers. And maybe, together, we can unravel the mysteries that remain to be discovered.